Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for gathering together to immerse ourselves both in the wisdom of the text that's written before us and the text of our relationships, which adds to that great body of wisdom. We are in a double portion this evening, Parshat Vayakhel-Pekudei, which begins in the book of Exodus at chapter 35. And if you'd like to unmute at this time, together we can recite our blessing, giving thanks for this moment.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot divrei Torah.
Thank you, God, for this opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. We will read through the English translation of our Torah portion together, and then I will share with you a focused study about it, and then we'll open it up for our collaborative conversation about it. Let me share with you the opening verses, and I'll invite others to have an opportunity to read as well. Moses then convoked the whole Israelite community and said to them, "These are the things that Adonai has commanded you to do. On 6 days, work shall be done, but on the seventh day, you shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, holy to God. Whoever does any work on it shall be put to death. You shall kindle no fire throughout your settlements on the Sabbath day." And then, Richard, would you like to read starting at verse 4?
Yes, Rabbi, thank you. Moses said further to the whole community of Israelites, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Take from among your gifts to the Lord, everyone whose heart so moves him shall bring them. Gifts for the Lord, gold, silver, and copper, blue, purple, and crimson yarns, fine linen, and goat's hair, tanned with ram skins, dolphin skins, and acacia wood, oil for lighting, species for the anointing oil, and for the aromatic incense, lapis lazuli, and other stones for setting, for the ephod, breastplate."
Thank you. And then, Sherry, would you like to read starting at verse 10?
Okay, thank you, Rabbi. "And let all among you who are skilled come and make all that the Lord has commanded: the tabernacle, its tent and covering, its clasps and its planks, its bars and its posts and its sockets, the ark and its poles, the cover and the curtain for the screen, the table and its poles and all its utensils, and the bread of display, the lampstand for lighting, its furnishings and its lamps, and the oil for lighting, the altar of incense and its poles, the anointing oil and the aromatic incense, and the entrance screen for the entrance of the tabernacle, the altar of the burnt offering, its copper grating, its poles and all of its furnishings, the laver and its stand, the hangings and the enclosure, its posts and its sockets, and the screen for the gate of the court, the pegs for the tabernacle, the pegs for the enclosure and their cords, the service vestments for officiating in the sanctuary, the sacral vestments of Aaron the priest, and the vestments of his sons for priestly service."
Thank you. Steve, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 20?
It bothered me that God would put somebody to death to try them.
Okay, we can talk about that in the course of our discussion.
So the whole community of the Israelites left Moses present, and everyone who excelled in ability and everyone whose spirit moved him came, bringing to the Lord his offering for the work of the tent of meeting, and for all its services, and for the sacral vestments. And men and women, all whose hearts moved them, all who would make an elevation offering to the Lord, came bringing brooches, earrings, rings, and pendants. I have trouble because I have double vision since I've been operated for and objects of all kinds. And everyone who had in his possession blue, purple, and crimson yarns, fine linen, goat's hair, tanned rim skins, and dolphin skins brought them.
Thank you so much, Steve. Now we're on verse 24. And June, would you like to read a little bit starting there?
Thank you, Rabbi. Everyone who would make gifts of silver or copper brought them as gifts for the Lord, and everyone who had in his possession acacia wood for any work of the service brought that. And all the skilled women spun with their own hands and brought what they had spun in blue, purple, and crimson yarns and in fine linen. And all the women who excelled in that skill spun the goat's hair. And the chieftains brought lapis lazuli and other stones for setting, for the ephod and for the breastpiece, and spices and oil for lighting, for the anointing oil and for the aromatic incense. Thus the Israelites, all the men and women whose hearts moved them to bring anything for the work that the Lord through Moses had commanded to be done, brought it as a free will offering to the Lord.
Thank you so much, June. Let me invite Dave Leb, if you'd like to read starting at verse 30.
And Moses said to the Israelites, see, Adonai has singled out by name Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, endowing him with a divine spirit of skill, ability, and knowledge in every kind of craft, and inspiring him to make designs for work in gold, silver, and copper, to cut stones for setting, and to carve wood, to work in every kind of designer's craft, and to give directions. He and Oholiab, son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, have been endowed with the skill to do any work of the carver, the designer, the embroiderer in blue, purple, crimson yarns, and in fine linen, and of the weaver, as workers in all crafts and makers of designs.
Thank you, Dave. Jim, would you like to read the first verse of chapter 36?
Let then Bezalel and Oholiab and all skilled persons whom Adonai has endowed with skill and ability to perform expertly all the tasks connected with the service of the sanctuary carry out all that Adonai has commanded. Moses then called Bezalel and Oholiab and every skilled person whom Adonai had endowed with skill, everyone who excelled in ability, to undertake the task and carry it out. They took over from Moses all the gifts that the Israelites had brought to carry out the tasks connected with the service of the sanctuary. But when these continued to bring free will offerings to him morning after morning, all the artisans who were engaged in the tasks of the sanctuary came, each from the task upon which he was engaged, and said to Moses, the people are bringing more than is needed for the tasks entailed in the work that the Adonai has commanded to be done. Moses thereupon had this proclamation made throughout the camp. Let no man or woman make further effort toward gifts for the sanctuary. So the people stopped bringing. Their efforts had been more than enough for all the tasks to be done.
Thank you so much. Robert, would you like to read starting at verse 8?
Yes, thank you. And every wise-hearted man among them that wrought the work of the tabernacle made 10 curtains of fine twined linen and blue and purple and scarlet, with cherubims of cunning work made he them. The length of one curtain was 28 cubits, and the breadth of one curtain 4 cubits. The curtains were all of one size. And he coupled the 5 curtains one unto another, and the other 5 curtains he coupled one unto another. And he made loops of blue on the edge of one curtain from the selvedge in the coupling. Likewise he made in the uttermost side of another curtain in the coupling of the second. 50 loops made he in one curtain, and 50 loops made he in the edge of the curtain which was in the coupling of the second. The loops held one curtain to another. And he made 50 tacks of gold and coupled the curtains one unto another with the tacks. So it became one tabernacle.
Thank you so much, Robert. Let me invite Joanne. Would you like to read a little bit, starting at verse 14?
Thanks, Rabbi. They made cloths of goat's hair for a tent over the tabernacle. They made the cloths 11 in number. The length of each cloth was 30 cubits, and the width of each cloth was 4 cubits. The 11 cloths having the same measurements. They joined 5 of the cloths by themselves and the other 6 cloths by themselves. They made 50 loops on the edge of the outermost cloth of the one set, and they made 50 loops on the edge of the end of the cloth of the other set. They made 50 copper clasps to couple the tent together so that it might become one whole. And they made a covering of tanned ram skins for a tent and a covering of dolphin skins above.
Thank you, Joanne. Dan, would you like to read starting at verse 20?
Thank you, Rabbi. They made the planks for the tabernacle of acacia wood, upright. The length of each plank was 10 cubits, the width of each plank a cubit and a half. Each plank had 2 tenons parallel to each other. They did the same with all the planks of the tabernacle. Of the planks of the tabernacle, they made 20 planks for the south side, making 40 silver sockets under the 20 planks, 2 sockets under one plank for its 2 tenons, and 2 sockets under each following plank for its 2 tenons. And for the other side wall of the tabernacle, the north side, 20 planks with their 40 silver sockets, 2 sockets under one plank, and 2 sockets under each following plank. And for the rear of the tabernacle to the west, they made 6 planks, and they made 2 planks for the corners of the tabernacle at the rear. They matched at the bottom, but terminated as one at the top into one ring. They did so with both of them at the 2 corners. Thus there were 8 planks with their sockets of silver, 16 sockets, 2 under each plank.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks so much. Robin, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 31?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. They made bars of acacia wood, 5 for the planks on the one side wall of the tabernacle, 5 bars for the planks of the other side wall of the tabernacle, and 5 bars for the planks of the wall of the tabernacle at the rear to the west. They made the center bar to run halfway up the planks from end to end. They overlaid the planks with gold and made their rings of gold as holders for the bars, and they overlaid the bars with gold. They made the curtain of blue, purple, and crimson yarns and fine twisted linen, working into it a design of cherubim. They made for it 4 posts of acacia wood and overlaid them with gold, with their hooks of gold, and they cast for them 4 silver sockets. They made the screen for the entrance of the tent of blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and fine twisted linen done in embroidery, and 5 posts for it with their hooks. They overlaid their tops and their bands with gold, but the 5 sockets were of copper.
Thank you so much, Robin. Paul, would you like to read a little bit at the very start of chapter 37?
Yes, thanks, Rabbi. Bezalel made the ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits in its length, 1.5 cubits its width, and 1.5 cubits its height. He covered it with pure gold, within and without, and he made it for a gold crown all around. He cast for them 4 rings of gold on its 4 corners, 2 rings on one side and 2 rings on the second side. He made staves of acacia wood and covered them with gold. He inserted the staves in the rings on the sides of the ark to carry the ark. He made a cover of pure gold, 2.5 cubits its length, and 1.5 cubits its width. He made 2 cherubs of gold. Hammered out did he make them. From the 2 ends of the cover, 1 cherub from the end at one end, and 1 cherub from the other end. From the cover did he make the cherubs from its 2 ends. The cherubs were with wings spread upwards, sheltering the cover with their wings, and their faces toward one another. Toward the cover were the faces of the cherubs.
Thank you so much. And let me invite to Catherine, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 10?
Thank you, Rabbi. He made the table of acacia wood, 2 cubits long, 1 cubit wide, and 1.5 cubits high. He overlaid it with pure gold and made a gold molding around it. He made a rim of a hand's breadth around it and made a gold molding for its rim round about. He cast 4 gold rings for it and attached the rings to the 4 corners of its 4 legs. The rings went near the rim as holders for the poles to carry the table. He made the poles of acacia wood for carrying the table and overlaid them with gold. The utensils that were to be upon the table, its bowls, ladles, jugs, and jars with which to offer libations, he made of pure gold.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you so much. Jay, would you like to read starting at verse 17?
Sure, thank you, Rabbi. He made the lampstand of pure gold. He made the lampstand, its base and its shaft, of hammered work. Its cups, calyxes, and petals were of one piece with it. 6 branches issued from its sides, 3 branches from one side of the lampstand, and 3 branches from the other side of the lampstand. There were 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with calyx and petals on one branch, and there were 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with calyx and petals on the next branch. So for all 6 branches issuing from the lampstand, on the lampstand itself, there were 4 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with calyx and petals, a calyx of one piece with it under a pair of branches, and a calyx of one piece with it under the second pair of branches, and a calyx of one piece with it under the last pair of branches. So for all 6 branches issuing from it, their calyxes and their stems were of one piece with it, the whole of it a single hammered piece of pure gold. He made 7 lamps, its tongs, and its fire pans of pure gold. He made it and all its furnishings out of a talent of pure gold.
Thank you so much, Jay. Justin, would you like to read starting at verse 25?
Thank you, Rabbi. Rabbi, I want to make sure this is chapter 37 or 38 that we're in.
Yes, this is chapter 37, verse 25. Thank you.
And he made the incense altar out of acacia wood, 1 cubit long and 1 cubit wide, square, and 2 cubits high. Its horns were one piece with it. And he overlaid it with pure gold on its top, its walls all around, and its horns. And he made for it a golden crown all round. And he made 2 golden rings for it underneath its crown, on its 2 corners, on its 2 sides, as holders for poles with which to carry it. And he made the poles out of acacia wood and overlaid them with gold. And he made the holy anointing oil and the pure incense after the art of a perfumer.
And why don't you continue just a little bit further, Justin, as we begin in chapter 38.
Thank you, Rabbi. And he made the altar for the burnt offerings of acacia wood, 5 cubits long and 5 cubits wide. The altar was square, and it was 3 cubits high. And he made its horns on its 4 corners. Its horns were all one piece from it, and he overlaid it with copper. And he made all the implements of the altar, the pots and the shovels, the sprinkling basins and the flesh hooks and the fire pans. He made all its implements of copper. And he made for the altar a copper grating of netting work beneath its ledge from below until its middle. And he cast 4 rings on the 4 ends of the copper grating, holders for the poles. And he made the poles of acacia wood, and he overlaid them with copper. And he inserted the poles into the rings on the sides of the altar with which to carry it. He made it hollow out of boards.
Thank you so much, Justin. And David and Susan, would you like to continue there at verse 8 of chapter 38?
Yes, thank you. He made the laver of copper and its stand of copper from the mirrors of the women who performed tasks at the entrance of the tent of meeting. He made the enclosure on the south side, 100 cubits of hangings of fine twisted linen for the enclosure, with their 20 posts and their 20 sockets of copper, the hooks and bands of the posts being silver. On the north side, 100 cubits, with their 20 posts and their 20 sockets of copper, the hooks and bands of the posts being silver. On the west side, 50 cubits of hangings, with their 10 posts and their 10 sockets, the hooks and bands of the posts being silver. And on the front side, to the east, 15 cubits of hangings on the one flank, with their 3 posts and their 3 sockets, and 15 cubits of hangings on the other flank, on each side of the gate of the enclosure, with their 3 posts and their 3 sockets. All the hangings around the enclosure were of fine twisted linen. The sockets for the posts were of copper. The hooks and bands of the posts were of silver. The overlay of their tops was of silver. All the posts of the enclosure were banded with silver.
I'll read yours.
Yeah.
And point.
The screen.
For 18, verse 18. The screen of the gate of the enclosure, done in embroidery, was of blue, purple, and crimson yarns and fine twisted linen. It was 20 cubits long. Its height, or width, was 5 cubits, like that of the hangings of the enclosure. The posts were 4, their 4 sockets were of copper, their hooks of silver, and the overlay of their tops was of silver, as were also their bands. All the pegs of the tabernacle and of the enclosure round about were of copper. Yes, would you like to continue, David, there at verse 21? These are the records of the tabernacle of the pact, which are drawn up at Moses' bidding. The work of the Levites under the direction of Ithamar, son of Aaron the priest. Now Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, had made all that Yudhe-Vavi had commanded Moses. At his side were Oholiab, son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, carver and designer, and embroiderer in blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and in fine linen. All the gold that was used for the work, and all the work of the sanctuary, the elevation offering of gold, came to 29 talents and 730 shekels by the sanctuary weight. The silver of those of the community who were recorded came to 100 talents, and 1,775 shekels by the sanctuary weight. A half shekel a head, half a shekel by the sanctuary weight for each one who was entered in the records from the age of 20 up, for 603,550 men. The 100 talents of silver were for casting the sockets of the sanctuary and the sockets for the curtain, 100 sockets to the 100 talents, a talent a socket. And each of the 1,775 shekels he made hooks for the posts, overlay for the tops, and bands around them. The copper from the elevation offering came to 70 talents and 2,400 shekels. Of it, he made the sockets for the entrance of the tent of meeting, the copper altar and its copper grating, and all the utensils of the altar, the sockets of the enclosure round about, and the sockets of the gate of the enclosure, and all the pegs of the tabernacle, and all the pegs of the enclosure round about. Thank you. We're now on chapter 39. Of the blue, purple, and crimson yarns, they also made the service vestments for officiating in the sanctuary. They made Aaron's sacral vestments as Adonai had commanded Moses. The ephod was made of gold, blue, purple, and crimson yarns and fine twisted linen. They hammered out sheets of gold and cut threads to be worked into designs among the blue, the purple, and the crimson yarns and the fine linen. They made for it attaching shoulder pieces. They were attached at its two ends. The decorated band that was upon it was made like it, of one piece with it, of gold, blue, purple, and crimson yarns and fine twisted linen, as God had commanded Moses. They bordered the lazuli stones with frames of gold, engraved with seal engravings of the names of the children of Israel. They were set on the shoulder pieces of the ephod as stones of remembrance for the Israelites, as God had commanded Moses. The breastpiece was made in the style of the ephod, gold, blue, purple, and crimson yarns and fine twisted linen. It was square. They made the breastpiece doubled, a span in length and a span in width, doubled. They set in it 4 rows of stones. The first row was a row of carnelian, chrysolite, and emerald. The second row, a turquoise, a sapphire, and an amethyst. The third row, a jacinth, an agate, and a crystal. And the fourth row, a beryl, a lapis lazuli, and jasper. They were encircled in their mountings with frames of gold. The stones corresponded in number to the names of the sons of Israel, 12, corresponding to their names, engraved like seals, each with its name, for the 12 tribes. June, would you like to read a little bit, starting at verse 15?
Thank you, Rabbi. On the breastpiece, they made braided chains of corded work in pure gold. They made 2 frames of gold and 2 rings of gold, and fastened the 2 rings at the 2 ends of the breastpiece, attaching the 2 golden cords to the 2 rings at the end of the breastpiece. They then fastened the 2 ends of the cords to the 2 frames, attaching them to the shoulder pieces of the ephod at the front. They made 2 rings of gold and attached to them the 2 ends of the breastpiece at its inner edge, which faced the ephod. They made 2 other rings of gold and fastened them on the front of the ephod, low on the 2 shoulder pieces, close to its seam above the decorated band. The breastpiece was held in place by a cord of blue from its rings to the rings of the ephod, so that the breastpiece rested on the decorated band and did not come loose from the ephod, as the Lord had commanded to Moses.
Thank you. Dave, Leib, would you like to read a little bit more at verse 22?
Sorry, I was muted. Was that chapter 40, 22?
We're on chapter 39, verse 22.
Okay, 39, 22. The robe for the ephod was made of woven work of pure blue. The opening of the robe in the middle of it was like the opening of a coat of mail, with a binding around the opening so that it would not tear. On the hem of the robe, they made pomegranates of blue, purple, and crimson yarns twisted. They also made bells of pure gold and attached the bells between the pomegranates, all around the hem of the robes between the pomegranates, a bell and a pomegranate, a bell and a pomegranate, all around the hem of the robe for officiating in, as the Lord had commanded Moses. They made the tunics of fine linen, of woven work for Aaron and his sons, and the headdress of fine linen, and the decorated turbans of fine linen, and the linen breeches of fine twisted linen, and the sashes of fine twisted linen, blue, purple, and crimson yarns, done in embroidery, as the Lord has commanded Moses. They made the frontlet for the holy diadem of pure gold, and incised upon it the seal inscription, Holy to the Lord. They attached to it a cord of blue to fix it upon the headdress above, as the Lord commanded Moses.
Thank you, Dave. Jim, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 32?
Thank you, Rabbi. Thus was completed all the work of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. The Israelites did so just as Adonai had commanded Moses, so they did. Then they brought the tabernacle to Moses, and the tent and all its furnishings, its clasps, its planks, its bars, its posts, and its sockets, the covering of tanned ram skins, the covering of dolphin skins, and the curtain for the screen, the ark of the pact and its poles and the cover, the table and all its utensils, and the bread of display, the pure lampstand, its lamps in due order, and all its fittings, and the oil for lighting, the altar of gold, the oil for anointing the aromatic incense, and the screen for the entrance of the tent, the copper altar with its copper grating, its poles and all its utensils, and the laver and its stand, the hangings of the enclosure, its posts and its sockets, the screen for the gate of the enclosure, its cords and its pegs, all the furnishings for the service of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, the service vestments for officiating in the sanctuary, the sacred vestments of Aaron the priest, and the vestments of his sons for priestly service, just as Adonai had commanded Moses. So the Israelites had done all their work. And when Moses saw that they had performed all the tasks as Adonai has commanded, so they had done, Moses blessed them.
Thank you, Jim. Margaret, would you like to read at the very start of chapter 40?
Yes, thank you. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, on the first day of the first month, you shall set up the tabernacle of the tent of the meeting. Place there the ark of the pact and the screen, off the ark with the curtains. Bring in the table and lay out its due settings. Bring in the lampstand and the lights and light its lamps, and place the gold altar of incense before the ark of the pact. Then put up the screen for the entrance to the entrance to the tabernacle. You shall place the altar of burnt offerings before the entrance of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. Place the laver between the tent of meeting and the altar, and put water in it. Set up the enclosures round and about, and put it in place the screens for the gate of the enclosure. You shall take the anointing oil and anoint the tabernacle and all that is in it, to consecrate it and all its furnishings, so that they shall be holy. Then anoint the altar of burnt offerings and all the utensils to be consecrated to consecrate the altar, so that the altar shall be most holy, and anoint the laver with its stand to consecrate it.
Thank you, Mario. Robert, would you like to read some more there at verse 12?
Yes, thank you. And thou shalt bring Aaron and his sons unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and wash them with water. And thou shalt put upon Aaron the holy garments, and anoint him, and sanctify him, that he may minister unto me in the priest's office. And thou shalt bring his sons, and clothe them with coats. And thou shalt anoint them as thou didst anoint their father, that they may minister unto me in the priest's office. For their anointing shall surely be an everlasting priesthood throughout their generations. Thus did Moses, according to all that the Lord commanded him, so did he. And it came to pass in the first month, in the second year, on the first day of the month, that the tabernacle was reared up. And Moses reared up the tabernacle, and fastened his sockets, and set up the boards thereof, and put in the bars thereof, and reared up the pillars. And he spread abroad the tent over the tabernacle, and put the covering of the tent above upon it, as the Lord commanded Moses. And he took and put the testimony into the ark, and set the staves on the ark, and put the mercy seat above upon the ark. And he brought the ark into the tabernacle, and set up the veil of the covering, and covered the ark of the testimony, as the Lord commanded Moses.
Thank you so much, Robert. Dan, would you like to read some more, starting in verse 22 of chapter 40?
Thank you, Rabbi. He placed the table in the tent of meeting outside the curtain on the north side of the tabernacle. Upon it, he laid out the setting of bread before Adonai, as Adonai had commanded Moses. He placed the lampstand in the tent of meeting opposite the table on the south side of the tabernacle. And he lit the lamps before Adonai, as Adonai had commanded Moses. He placed the altar of gold in the tent of meeting before the curtain. On the burned aromatic incense, on it he burned aromatic incense, as Adonai had commanded Moses.
Thank you so much, Dan. Let me invite Robin. Would you like to read starting at verse 28?
Yes, thank you. Then he put up the screen for the entrance of the tabernacle. At the entrance of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting, he placed the altar of burnt offering. On it he offered up the burnt offering and the meal offering, as Adonai had commanded Moses. He placed the laver between the tent of meeting and the altar, and put water in it for washing. From it Moses and Aaron and his sons would wash their hands and feet. They washed when they entered the tent of meeting and when they approached the altar, as Adonai had commanded Moses. And he set up the enclosure around the tabernacle and the altar, and put up the screen for the gate of the enclosure. When Moses had finished the work, the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the presence of Adonai filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled upon it, and the presence of Adonai filled the tabernacle. When the cloud lifted from the tabernacle, the Israelites would set out on their various journeys, but if the cloud did not lift, they would not set out until such time as it did lift. For over the tabernacle, a cloud of Adonai rested by day, and fire would appear in it by night, in the view of all the house of Israel throughout their journeys.
Thank you so much, and thank you, everyone. And that concludes not only our Torah portion for this week, it concludes a book of Torah. And so there's a special prayer that we recite, and we can say that together if you'd like to unmute. Hazak, be strong, and we shall be strengthened. So thank you all very much. This is a double portion concluding the book of Exodus, and it's a double portion that is so rich in detail, both about the construction of the Mishkan, the materials that went into it, as well as the materials that go into what the priests will wear, and both the Mishkan itself, all the vessels in it, and the priests themselves are all to be anointed with holy oil. So I'd like to share with you something that jumped out at me as I was studying this week's Torah portion. And if you have a copy of the study sheet, I invite you to take it out now. And if you look on the study sheet, number 1 is a verse from our portion that we read. Let all among you who are skilled, and the Hebrew there is acham lev, come and make all that God has commanded. So I was struck by this notion about those who are being commissioned, who make these objects that are both beautiful and have a holy purpose. The particular skill that they bring to it is this notion of being a hacham lev, which literally means, as actually Robert read in his translation, wise-hearted. So that seems to be the primary talent, skill that they bring to this commission, to be wise-hearted. That notion of being wise-hearted occurs both in the book of Exodus. We'll see it also in the book of Leviticus, and it also comes up in the book of Proverbs. And here is from Proverbs 10:8. One whose heart is wise, Acham Lev, receives commands. So there seems to be perhaps something about this notion of being wise of heart that not only provides these people with these capacities to make beautiful things that are to be consecrated in service to God, but also it somehow facilitates receiving these kinds of instructions about living a holy life. Also in the book of Proverbs, immediately preceding the one that we've just read in chapter 9, verses 1 through 2, we have this notion of wisdom also appearing. And that verse reads, wisdom, Chochmot, has built her house. She has hewn her 7 pillars. She has prepared her feast, mixed the wine, and also set the table, Shulchan. So here, this notion about wisdom, wisdom seems to be some kind of force that builds, it constructs, it designs, it also serves to invite into a home. It serves to play host to those who come into the home. It also serves to nourish those who come into the home and sit around the table. So we like to play with all these notions about wisdom, skill, creativity, hospitality, and building. So when I think about building, this notion about having these beautiful skills, this artistry, I turn to one of the great French philosophers, Gaston Bachelard, who wrote a book about architecture called The Poetics of Space. And in that book, he writes, if I were asked to name the chief benefit of a house, I should say the house shelters daydreaming. The house protects the dreamer. The house allows one to dream in peace. So Bachelard is talking about the true benefit of creating a structure within which one can dwell is that it promotes dreaming, it promotes imagination, it promotes creativity, it promotes innovation. And so if you turn over, I'd like to share with you a little bit more about from Bachelard, and this is from his book, Air and Dreams. And he's going to here talk about the nature of imagination. And he writes in that book, we always think of the imagination as the faculty that forms images. On the contrary, it deforms what we perceive. It is, above all, the faculty that frees us from immediate images and changes them. If there is no change or unexpected fusion of images, there is no imagination, there is no imaginative act. If the image that is present does not make us think of one that is absent, if an image does not determine an abundance, an explosion of unusual images, then there is no imagination. A stable and completely realized image clips the wings of the imagination. Thanks to the imaginary, imagination is essentially open and elusive. It is the human psyche's experience of openness and novelty. More than any other power, it is what distinguishes the human psyche. So this notion that Bachelard is sharing with us about how imagination is not so much a faculty that creates images, rather it uncreates them. It gives new possibilities to what already exists. So here's a fascinating midrash in number 5 here from Midrash Bamidbar Rabbah, in which the rabbis here are playing with the notion about what happened when Moses received some instructions about how to build the Mishkan, which we've read here is in such detail. And so the Midrash plays on this notion about what kind of instructions did Moses get from God about what was to be built and to create the Mishkan. The Midrash reads this way. When the Holy Blessed One commanded Moses, make me a Mishkan, God should have just put up 4 poles and spread out the Mishkan over them. We must therefore infer that the Holy Blessed One showed Moses on high red fire, green fire, black fire, and white fire, and said to him, set it up according to the manner of it that you were shown on the mountain. So the Midrash is when Moses went up on the mountain, he wasn't shown a charrette, he wasn't shown an exact model that he was to then just replicate. The rabbis say, no, what Moses was shown was just some kind of impressions, some kind of images, some kinds of just colors is what they're saying. Here, it's red fire, green fire, black fire, and white fire. Go ahead and make it that way. And so from that, the rabbis are indicating that these people who are Chacham Lev, who are wise-hearted, they are skilled in the way of imagination. They have been commissioned not to merely replicate something from a blueprint. They have been commissioned to use their own imaginations and their own creativity to shape something that has just been presented to them as colors and fire. And so if you take a look at our painting from Pablo Picasso that's on the front, what happened in the mid-19th century in the world of art was a revolution, because for hundreds of years, artists were expected to merely replicate reality, either in the form of a historical presentation, a biblical presentation, or perhaps to try and shape and give some kind of visual image for a moral lesson. And everything was highly controlled, especially in the center of art at the time in France, by the French Academy. And they determined what was acceptable in terms of art, what would be allowed to be shown, and who would be allowed to exhibit art in these annual exhibitions that were controlled by the French Academy. And then in the mid-19th century, a group of artists rebelled against that notion of control, both over who could show art and what kind of art was acceptable. And those were the Impressionists. And the Impressionists then freed artists from, therefore, being controlled, because they showed their own works. They in 1874, they rented a space in a former photography studio, and they promoted their own art, and that had never been done in over 200 years that the French Academy had controlled who was to exhibit and what art was to be exhibited. So that was an act of liberation for artists. And as a result of that act of liberation, artists then began to explore different ways of presenting how they experience the world around them. And after the Impressionists, we have the post-Impressionists, including Paul Cézanne, who played with the notions of perspective and tilted perspectives so that things look very different than actually as many of us would logically see the world around us. And then after the post-Impressionists came the work of Pablo Picasso, Georges Braque, and others who were the Cubists. And the Cubists played with the whole notion of dimensions and planes. And here's one of the high examples of that work here, this bust de femme assise. And this is a portrait of Picasso's second wife. And you can see here, this is not what many of us would think of when we say, oh, paint a portrait of someone's face. Because here he's playing with the notion that there are multiple planes to anyone's facial existence, and their facial existences are indicative of who they are. This person has dimensions beyond what seems to be a smooth singularity. And so
I like that. That was a good way to put it.
thank you. So this is exploring the notion and revealing to us that each of us, it's not just Picasso's second wife, but the Cubist is telling us we all have dimensionality beyond what seems to be presented on the surface. And it is in those encounters with our multidimensionality of one another that we begin to draw out something that is sacred. And I think that's what's happening here in our Torah portion, is that rather than being given a model and told to just reproduce this model I'm giving you, these artisans, these artists are being liberated to use their creativity and their imagination. And later, in Jewish history, we will have commentary from within the Hasidic realm, who will interpret all of this to mean to say, just as they were designing a Mishkan for their times based upon their inspiration and creativity, we have an obligation to do the same thing, to use our creativity, to use our imaginations, to shape something that is full of fire, dynamism, dimensionality, and creativity, not merely replicate what has been handed down and constructed prior to us. So with that, I'd love to open up the conversation and see what you encountered, what you experienced during our reading of our double portion. If you raise your hand, I'd love to call upon you. Richard.
Yes, we started out I think it was Steve, who said he had a little difficulty with God putting people to death who didn't pay attention to the Sabbath. But what you're saying now had me think, as I did earlier tonight, that, you know, why the Sabbath is a holy time of rest, and that's when God sleeps under the cloud and you don't move when that's going on. And if he needs you to move, the light will go on. And you talk about dreamings. Well, the Sabbath is when we can do our dreaming. And when that dream happens, we're in another dimension. And there's a greater chance that we'll be able to help God renew creation daily if we take account of our dreams rather than just our desires. And I think that just knots together this whole portion.
Wow.
Beautiful.
Wow.
Thank you.
I love this notion about making a distinction between dreams and desires. That's fascinating. If others who have an experience in the course of our reading this double portion, Paul, please.
Yeah, each week I tried when we read to actually read what we read. And so certain messages jump out at me. I know that everybody uses as a jumping board, but I try to understand a little bit about the characters they're putting in front of me. What is God like? What is Moses like? And this particular thing really, like when if you put a timeline down, first he comes with the 10 Commandments and he sees the golden calf, he breaks them, but then he goes back and he spends a lot of time working with God, spending a lot of time about those 10 Commandments. But now he also does some more. God, he comes back and he says, God said so many pomegranates, so many staves, and that's a lot of time and a lot of work between God and Moses. And it assumes somehow or other, with all that, before I had an image of Moses, and really didn't respect him for as much as he was doing, being a leader, but this was really memorizing tremendous amount of information. That's what it says. I mean, it's so many cubits and so many pieces of wood and so forth. So all that time that he's spending with God, it bothers me quite a bit that there was no relationship, that God wouldn't feel sorry for him and let him go see, Aaron, who just, all he had to do was supervise a calf. I mean, the calf is a calf, it's small. This was a major piece of an epic, almost worthy of a movie in a way. But the guy who did all the real work, all the memory, all the commandments, and identifying all the people that will be doing it, that's a blueprint. And somehow or other, God doesn't ever soften to him. And so, and he of course, I mentioned last week, he could have been a smooth talker, would have helped a little bit. But, but I really feel sorry for Moses. He just doesn't get a break anywhere, even though he's exposed to the boss all the time. I mean, he never made the case for himself.
Thanks, Paul. I see so many hands up. Let me continue to call Robert, please.
Yeah. I just want to, as always, thank you for the evening. Very, very delightful. Whenever we have these sections on the Mishkan, I always go to the internet so I can see it.
Yeah.
Because it's, so if you see me looking like this, I actually work with a computer copy and a phone copy, just in case my phone copy goes south. So I go back and forth. What I wanted to say was about wisdom. This wisdom is such a beautiful word, and it's so powerful. And I know in the Baha'i writings, it's referred to as an unfailing antidote. And it's something that typically in everyday life with many people is rarely exercised. I'm sure the people on this call exercise it, because obviously, these are thoughtful people. But if you look at what goes on in the world, there's so much. And then what does it mean to be wise? I mean, you need understanding, you need thought, and then those have to rise to a higher level, like cream rises out of milk. And then it requires selflessness, it requires humility, and it requires perseverance. And so it's just one of these treasures of the soul. In fact, I made a little note to myself, wisdom, timeless wonder of the soul. And so thank you, it's lovely.
Thank you, Robert, beautiful. And let me ask Catherine if you'd unmute and share with us, please.
Yeah, as we were reading the Parshat, I just was thinking how we cannot experience the sacred without some kind of preparatory process, without this creative labor. And so this is also, I guess, an appreciation of the creativity in certain types of labor. And I like that.
That's beautiful, Catherine. Thank you so much. And let me see, David Susan, did you have your hand up earlier? Is there something that you wanted to share?
It was so trivial, I took the hand down.
Oh, honey.
Okay.
Oh.
I wanted to share a little bit. In part, Steve had a comment even before we finished reading the portion about God killing people who were going to violate the Sabbath, and Paul is raising this point about having a sense of compassion for Moses, who's trying to fulfill this enormous job as project manager and leader of this group. So here's one thing that you all got me to think about, which is that we can either look at the text as separate from us and begin to analyze it and respond to it and have either positive or negative responses to it. Or perhaps we can focus on our encounter with the text. Like, what does it mean that certain things that we encounter there cause us to have certain feelings or thoughts? And so perhaps it would be a rich and creative exercise to spend more time, or at least spend an equal amount of time thinking about and exploring the nature of our encounter with the text and how we're responding to it, as well as the text objectively encountered. So I see now that David and Susan, you've got a hand up. So please, Susan, and you'll have to unmute. Yeah.
It was me. And as you were saying, you know, the lack of compassion, and it suddenly occurred to me that it's kind of incumbent upon all of us to find the joy in whatever it is that we're doing and to carry that joy forth.
Yeah. To bring in that notion of joy, I think is so important. And let me just perhaps begin to conclude our session together by going back to the painting of Picasso's painting, because part of the revolution that the Impressionists started, that then was picked up by artists afterwards, was the notion that I'm not merely painting a representation of what I'm seeing before me. I'm also presenting to you how I experienced what I saw before me. And in a sense, that is what disturbed the established art world, which was to have a sense of detachment. That was considered to be what would be critical. And the Impressionists say, no, I'm going to share with you my subjective experience of the tree, the fields, the workers in the fields, and that will be an element of what I'm sharing with you. And here in this painting that Picasso does of his wife at the time, they had only been married, I think, 2 years when he painted this. He's not merely presenting to us his wife, he's presenting to us what he experiences in his relationship with his wife.
That's what it is then about God and Steve's question. If you take this, it's like a death to your creative self if you work on Shabbat, because it's a special time where you get to experience God. Exactly. It's not so much, I read it, it's not so much somebody's going to get murdered or chopped up, although that doesn't preclude that necessarily, but a reading for our day to me would be that if you don't pause and take time to be present with the greatest lover, the love of the universe, then it's so much to your hurt.
You don't dream, you die.
There you go. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, that's all right. Go ahead, Steve. Yeah.
About God being so strict that if you work on the Sabbath, that he put you to death. But how many people try to please their boss and try to work overtime, get the project in earlier or better or whatnot like that? And what would happen if the boss fired him because he tried to work overtime to do a better job? It doesn't make sense. He doesn't come back. God give him a lesson and say, wow, I really appreciate you working on Sabbath to make the world a better place to live in, but it isn't really necessary. Yoder. I mean, he doesn't make it into a teaching moment.
So,
It's just there.
so here, I appreciate that people are saying a little bit longer because we have this double portion. Let me just suggest here is another way to encounter the text, which is rather than seeing that there is some kind of external authority, which in our narrative here is given the name God, rather than focusing on an external authority, which is imposing upon us rules, and which is threatening a punishment upon us for violating those rules. Perhaps another way to look at it is that this is a work of art that is trying to give a presentation of something that is happening within us internally, that there is an internal desire, that there is an internal compulsion, an internal need, perhaps, to take time out from the week in order to suspend ourselves and recognize if you pause for a moment, you will not disappear. If you pause for a moment, you will not crumble and die. If you pause for a moment, you will not be meaningless. You will instead, if you can suspend yourself within time and space, as Dave has in his background there, you'll be nourished in such a way that you will be revived and you will be content and happy and fulfilled and purposeful, rather than continuing to only strive and strive and strive and strive in the world. So perhaps that's part of this message here of this entire body of work, which is the artists here who put this together are trying, how can I convey a message about the personal internal integrity of each of us and of us as a community, and of what it means to live a life that is attentive to the rhythms of the universe, and how to be attuned with those. Well, and so there's this voice that says, you must rest on Shabbat, and if you don't, you're going to die. And those people who find moments of meditation, who find moments of detachment from all the anxieties and worries and drive in the world, find fulfillment. And perhaps that's what's happening here. So again, as our artists are telling us, it's not merely what we see in front of us that is a work of beauty and a work of art. It's also what we bring to the encounter and how we assess our experience and our encounter with what is outside of us.
Honey, when I'm with you, it's like Shabbat always. Thank you.
Beautiful. Sweet. I want to thank everyone for helping to enrich our time together, and to recognize that it's not just the text in front of us written in this book that's to be assimilated. It's our relationships that's to be assimilated, and what we learn from one another. And that enriches this great body of work we call Torah. God bless you all. Thank you so much. Look forward to our
Thank
next.
you, Rabbi.
Be well.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
See you next week.
It was marvelous. Really was.